Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I am your host, John Dehlin. It is August 23rd, 2019, and we are continuing our series today on how to survive BYU, Brigham Young University, as an unorthodox or non-believing student. We have interviewed 3 people so far. We've had some wonderful interviews, and we are going to be interviewing our third person today before we then have a panel. And this is all sort of culminating around a really important resource that needs to get a lot more attention, especially as it's back to school time right now in 2019. And as more and more BYU students and, Mormon missionaries, frankly, lose their faith and need support and feel alone, the BYU Survival Guide can be a phenomenal resource for those who have to go to BYU Provo, BYU Idaho, BYU Hawaii. And, I think they're looking into expanding into Southern Virginia University, SVUU, and LDS Business College. But anyway, we are just in the midst of talking about how tough it is to lose your faith at BYU. It can cause depression. It can cause suicidality. You can feel alone. You can feel crazy. And you can lose your academic standing, be turned into the honor code office. You can be kicked out of the university, which means you can lose sometimes 1 to 2 years of credit, 1 to 2 years of your life, and 1 to 2 years worth of expenses, not to mention whatever emotional, psychological trauma that will accompany that you'll have to kind of get over. So it's a pretty serious thing. We're not aware of any good systems that BYU has to deal with this. There are rumors that BYU allows you to fill out a form to shift from a believing student to a non-member, but there's no indication that anyone's done that successfully. And so it's a real problem that we want to help see addressed. And that's why we're doing this series, not only to support BYU students, but also to help the Mormon Church change, because we know that they pay attention to podcasts. We know that they make changes based on what is said on podcasts and on the internet. And so this is just another opportunity for growth for the Mormon Church. And we're very grateful and happy to support you in that way. So without any further ado, we're going to be interviewing our 4th guest today on Mormon Stories Podcast. His name is Andrew Jacobs, and he is going to be talking to us about his journey becoming a BYU student and then losing his faith. So without any further ado, Andrew, welcome to Mormon Stories Podcast.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. All right. Well, you've heard the others. Tell us your story.
Yeah. I guess we should start like the others at the beginning. Just talking about my upbringing. I was very Orthodox as a very believing young person. I was born in California and I was raised there. I think there are just some keynotes that I want to go through that really shaped the way that I approached this early on in my life. And some of those things are like very early on, I became really fascinated with Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison was my idol. I really loved just the process of invention, and my parents really supported me in that. My dream was some kids grow up wanting to be a police officer, firefighter. I just really wanted to invent the next light bulb. And I thought for sure that I could create hover shoes, and I would draw up plans like with propellers on the bottom with a motor in the sole. And my mom would bring me to, I think it's Hobbytown, USA, and she would help me buy all the parts to build these hover shoes. And usually I didn't get as far as putting the propeller in the shoe, because as soon as I got the propeller attached to the little motor, I realized it wasn't powerful enough and that it wouldn't support human weight. I learned a lot about how not necessarily physics really work, but how they worked practically in the real world. And it yielded a lot of testing and a lot of trial and error and the thought that I should never give up and that my parents would always support me. Then another thing is that my grandpa showed me when I was really young a magic trick, and that just fascinated me. I thought, that is crazy. And so I was always I had this desire when I was little to really have real magic. And I would, every year for Christmas, ask Santa for just a little bit of his magic so that I could do real magic. But what that ended up turning into, as I learned Santa wasn't real, sorry for anyone watching, what I realized that there were tricks that could be done to make it look like you had magic, and I thought that that was really cool. And so I became a magician, and I would approach everything from that moment on as though it were a trick and figure out how it could be done. So I had two traits by this point. One, the process of inventing, which is failing and failing and failing until you get it right. And then the other one where anything can be done, or at least you can make it look like anything can be done. And if you can't, then you just apply the process of invention and come up with a way to make it look like that thing can be done. And so I really didn't think that this would come up later on in life with applying to my faith, because as I grew up, I was very, very active in the church. And that's all thanks to my dad. He's very active in the church today. And he taught me so much about how to care for people, especially within the ward. He showed me how to go to families that needed help and really provide service and support and friendship for them. And we would go to people's houses and make sure that if they wanted to go to an activity at church, to make sure that they could get there. And then, or there were some families that were literally living out of hotels because they couldn't find a home, and the hotel was being paid for, I think, through government support, just because they couldn't find a home. And by a hotel, I mean the worst motel in our city, just a really grungy spot for a whole family to be living. And I don't really know all the details of that because I was pretty young and I wasn't told everything. So I don't want to say details that aren't actually correct. But what I learned from the experience was just to, no matter what, help people who need it. And that began when I was around 12. I remember that's when the deacons were told to start setting up the chapel for church. And I would show up every week, even if it was by myself, and set up the chapel overflow with chairs. And I remember being really angry about it at the time, thinking that I was like all by myself and I didn't like that nobody else was helping me. But it really showed me after a while that I could make a difference even if it was on my own. And then growing up a little further, I ended up, I never really was given direct responsibilities or callings when I was young. So that gave me a lot of extra time to pick up slack where I thought I saw it. And that wasn't, I never really was thinking of this as a critical thing of people, but sometimes I saw where people either didn't have time, fellow church members that were my age didn't have time to fulfill the responsibility that they had been given, and I thought that I could pick up that slack. For example, when I was never part of a youth conference committee, but I knew the people who were in youth conference committee, and I knew that they wouldn't be going around to these families who were inactive and getting their children the pamphlet so that they could attend youth conference if they wanted to. And so I went to them and said, hey, can I get those pamphlets? I'll go pass them out for you. And so I made sure always to try to do my best, even when it wasn't what was expected of me. It was what I felt I wanted to do. And I never felt like I was needed. Well, I felt like I was needed, but I never did it because I felt like I was needed. I did it because I wanted to. And so, I think everything was smooth sailing in my life. High school was great. We'll return to a specific instance in high school that at the time I thought was very faith building, but soon would return to be probably the moment that I felt the most deceived by anything. I went on to BYU directly out of high school. I went to summer term, and my plan was just to go to summer term, then go on a mission. And when I went up to college, I had a really great time. I met a girl, got a girlfriend, and when we were trying to think exactly how to express this, but in the culminating months leading up to going on a mission, we very, very lightly broke the law of chastity, and that resulted in me being delayed on going on my mission. And I was super distraught about that because I wasn't in school because I had skipped out on fall term because I was expecting to go on my mission. And when I did that, I felt already that I was so trapped at home in California. And so when I told my mom that I wouldn't be able to go for another 6 months is what my stake president had told me. My mom said, well, repentance is between you and God. So it's not between you and the stake president. So don't let him tell you that 6 months is what's going to happen. Go to God. And if you can show him that you've repented, then God will tell the stake president that you can go on your mission sooner. And so I went back home, and after being told that, I went to my room and prayed and read the scriptures for 24 hours. I didn't sleep, and I really took to heart the idea of, I think it's Enoch, who prays so hard for forgiveness. And I really thought that I could do the same thing. That was a really spiritual experience for me. And I went back to my stake president, and when I told him that, he said, I can tell you've repented. I haven't reported this to my superiors yet, so I think that you're ready to go out on your mission.
Wow, that's a cool story.
Yeah. And at this point, I was really excited. So I had already passed the delay point to leave that month. So I was going out on the next transfer cycle, and this is where I think my faith started to really be called into question, or at least the start of it. I didn't recognize it as such, but this is where I suddenly realized that I was being ripped away from my family for 2 years. And I went out to the MTC in Mexico. I was called to Tampico, Mexico, and my mission was not fun. It was hell. But it's an experience that I still cherish. The MTC was a blast. I really loved learning. I made a lot of friends. But when I got out to the mission field, the first thing that happened to me was I was taking a shower, and out of the shower had popped a worm. And this worm landed on my eye and then crawled down my eye. Yeah. So that was the start of me getting 5 different types of parasites while on my mission in the course of 6 weeks. And I was dying.
And again, you were where?
Mexico.
Okay. You were dying?
Yeah. I felt physically the most pain that I've ever felt in my life.
From your eye or from other things too?
From the other 5 parasites. So the eye is connected to your ears, mouth, nose, and mouth. Yeah, I said mouth. And so it just traveled down to my digestive system. And from there, that's when I started getting really sick. And when I couldn't eat anything. I couldn't sleep. I would go to bed on my mission with my insides feeling as though they're on fire. And my mission companion would go to sleep, and then I would move to the other room and lay on the floor on the tile because my body just felt so hot. And I would lay on the cold floor to try to cool myself down. And I would punch the floor until I passed out. And I would wake up around an hour or so later with bloody knuckles and other worms crawling on me because we were just not in good living conditions. And I had scorpions on me. It was just terrible. And it went on for like that for around 6 weeks. That was the first 6 weeks of being actually in Mexico, or being in my area in Mexico, because I went to the Mexico MTC. It was in those moments that I was only sleeping around an hour every night. And so by the end of the 6 weeks, my companion, I was barely able to walk. I had also contracted gastritis at this point. So that means I wasn't able to eat anything more acidic than a tomato. And so I was eating just essentially crackers when I could. And I was in the hospital every weekend. And then it got to the point where I was taking one step and I could tell that the next step was the step where I end up on the dirt and I pass out in a country where I can only barely confidently speak the language. And I didn't know what to do. And I told my companion, hey, we need to take a rest. I can't move on anymore. And he said, okay, well, we only have one more lesson for the day. And it was around 6, 7. I don't know what time it was, but it was later on in the day. And we only had one more lesson to get to. But it was kind of far away. And I said, okay, I can make it, but we're going to have to go at my pace. I'm going to pass out if we don't move slowly for me. Then he said, okay. Then he looks at his watch and he says, well, actually, in order to make it, we have to run there. And I said, I can't do that. And then he said, stay with your companion. And he took off running. And I, on the verge of passing out, just said, okay, like tunnel vision is creeping in. I'm alone. I know the directions to get there. I'll just take one step at a time. I can do this. And so as I'm taking each step, it's starting to get darker at this point, and I'm in the only 200 square foot of pavement in the city that was near our apartments. And that's when I started hearing growling around me, and that's when dogs started circling around me. And usually in Mexico, when dogs start to attack you just pick up a rock and throw it at one, and they all understand we're going to get hit by rocks if we try to do anything. Let's run away. But again, I was in the only paved part of the city and there were no rocks. So I had to just keep pretending on the verge of passing out that I was throwing rocks at dogs to make them wince back, as if you're throwing a treat to them, but not actually throwing air, because dogs are dumb. So that they'll react, but then they quickly figure out the trick and they just come back. So I just did that I have no clue how long. Time just kind of stopped existing for me. It was survive, and that's it. And so by the time I just kind of kept shifting, trying to get to a more civilized part of the city. And when I got there, the dogs just kind of left, and my companion was waiting there, and he grilled me for taking so long, and I was way too tired to give him an explanation. And I just said, okay, let's just keep going to the lesson. And that was it. And then I got transferred that transfer, and then found out that I also had torn my ACL and meniscus before I came out on a mission. And so ended up going home for knee surgery 6 weeks after that. So I was only out on my mission for 12 weeks. And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of people have pointed to that as the source of my faith transition. And I can just say, with absolute certainty that it was not. I came home from my mission believing that it was the most wonderful experience that I had ever had. And a lot of that was because I didn't remember all of those traumatic experiences. And after I had surgery and started preparing to go back, I had a lot of these memories resurface. And I went and saw a psychologist, and he helped me out a lot. But anyways, so I returned back to BYU. Everything's going fantastic for me. I feel really good now. I've seen a psychologist. I feel more mentally secure. I'm not going back on my mission, which relieved a lot of anxiety for me because of all the things that had happened to me previously when I had gone the first time. And I meet another girl, and things are going well. And then she wants to know, should she go on a mission? And I, of course, said no. And she said, well, I'm not sure. Let's ask God. And I said, okay, like, that's up to you. I'm not a part of this because I can't ask. Like, the way that it works is you say that, like, how is it phrased? That it's almost like spiritual jurisdiction. You have authority over yourself. And so, like, fathers have authority over their family. Bishops have authority over their ward. I felt like I had no authority over her, and I could not receive revelation for her. And I said, I don't think I can pray about this. And she said, no, I really feel like you should. And I said, okay. And so we both prayed about it. And I was at that point feeling as though I had received, like, consent in some form, and thought, okay, well, we'll both pray about it and come back and compare answers. And I expected God to give us both the same answer. And she said that God told her a resounding yes, she should go on a mission. And I had gotten the complete opposite answer. And at that point, I initially was like, oh, yeah, of course, like, spiritual jurisdiction. Again, like, that makes a lot of sense. But I didn't understand at the time that placed a huge weight on my shelf, that I felt like even if that was the case, when I had gone to ask the question, I didn't ask, should she go on a mission? I asked, should I support her in going on a mission? So that's about me. And I got no. And so I was really confused at how God could give seemingly different answers simultaneously to two different people about the same topic. And I was very confused by that, but I didn't recognize that at the time. And so she leaves, goes on a mission, and I spiral into depression. I thought at first that I had ADHD. I wasn't able to focus or get anything done at work. I wasn't able to I was doing really poorly with grades. I wasn't keeping up with activities. And when I started to, I went home to be what I thought was interviewed by a therapist or a psychiatrist about ADHD. And the psychiatrist diagnosed me with depression, or at least a situational depression. They put me on Zoloft. And that was really helpful for me. It cleared my head up. I was able to be more productive at work, but it also gave me a clear mind to really approach some of these questions that I had. And it almost was serendipitous. Like, in the same way that people tell these stories of the number of unique things that happen to them when they're trying to pray about the Book of Mormon and see if it's true. And wow, this could only happen if God was there. All these things that really just happened all at the right time for me. That's what happened, except for deconversion. I was just getting into cybersecurity at the time. I was very interested in that, and WikiLeaks and Snowden, and I was very fascinated by things like that. So I had just watched the Snowden movie, and regardless of historical accuracy or political swing, despite all of that, the moral of the movie is just that you can't trust authority because it has authority. You can't trust authority because they claim it. People have to earn their authority. And I thought, wow, that's a really, really good message. And I didn't even think about the implications of that. I didn't have time to. My dad came downstairs within 5 minutes of me finishing the movie and having that thought and said, hey, do you want to watch this show about Scientology with me hosted by Leah Remini? And I said, yeah, sure, because my dad and I love to watch historical movies and just documentaries together. And so I go upstairs to his room, and I'm watching this show with my mom and dad. And this episode is particularly about finances within Scientology. And in this episode, they discuss how Scientology isn't nearly as successful in other countries because they have to be financially transparent to their constituents. And that's not the case here in the US with any religion. Or it's not a requirement for any religion. And so while this is happening, somebody who's on the show says, "Hey, Leah, you should really try to get this instigated in the US." And I said, in my head, yeah, that's a great plan. That's absolutely, yes, that would stop organizations that are doing terrible things with their finances. And I thought that in my head, and then my dad chimes in from behind me because I'm sitting in front of him on his bed, and he says, "I just see this as a pattern of taking down churches." And I said, in my head again, that would only take down bad churches, though, because only people who have stuff to hide, and we have nothing to hide, right? 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 I just kept going over that, and it just rang so hard in my head. You can't just trust authority. You can't just trust authority because they claim it. And so I went downstairs thinking, all right, time to put this in the box once and for all. I'm going to see that we have nothing left to hide. And I go downstairs and just start looking into the finances of the church. And I found out how much I didn't know. And I didn't know just how much general authorities were getting paid with their modest stipend. I didn't know how much money the church threw at City Creek. I didn't know a lot of things, including the amount of tithing that really goes to charity versus other institutions. And so at the same time, I thought, okay, well, I need to really go over this, and I need to really get into each of these points and build it up from the bottom. And as I went through, I just felt like for every point, I was expecting it to all end up evening out and be on faith. And at the end, it felt like it was going to be pros versus cons, and pros would be pro-church and cons would be contrary to the church. And it felt like the con stack got so high, and I never felt like faith would have to overcome so much in order for something to be true. And at that point, that's when I instituted a test, and this is where the inventor side came out. And I went out, and I was 21 at this point, and I just bought a Mike's Hard Lemonade and drank that on my own. And the test was just to see if the spirit was really there. And if it was there, I would feel guilty. And if it wasn't, then I wouldn't feel guilty. And I would be caught. And there would be so much more to affect my life. And when I went out and drank that by myself, and then I threw it specifically in the dumpster at my own house with the idea in mind that if the spirit was really trying to show me that God was there, my parents would have a prompting to look in the garbage at their own house for no reason. I don't know. And that never happened. I went on for 6 months just kind of waiting for an answer, and nothing happened. And so that gets me to a point where I no longer believe, and I approach my friend and say, "Hey, I think I don't believe anymore." And his first reaction was, "Hey, we should go smoke some weed." And I stopped and said, wait, I don't even know what I think about life, let alone whether or not I think I should smoke weed. And that becomes really important as I transition into a BYU space. And I'm thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing. I need a social group. I was closeted and depressed. At this point, I'm off of the antidepressant medication. I told my parents thinking that this is really stuff that I didn't know. And I thought that it's just that my parents didn't know either. And so I go and tell them, and they said, "You're deceived by Satan. And the next day, my mom's at my apartment saying that they canceled my prescription for Zoloft, which was coincidentally something I wanted to get off anyways, so I wasn't too upset, but it still seemed like a massive breach of trust. And it felt like...
And it's also dangerous, just for those who are paying attention.
Yeah.
You don't want to cancel SSRIs too quickly. There can be even up to strong feelings of suicidality that come from really dramatic changes in medications.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess I forgot to mention that when I told my parents, I was really nervous, but I also felt confident that they would take my side, because up until this point, they had backed me almost every step of the way through life. But I also was very nervous because my mom told me, despite being very supportive of me all through my life, my mom told me when I was young, the only thing I could ever do to hurt her was leave the church. And that was it. There was no like practical application for that because that never came up. But that rang true in my ears every time I thought about it. And now I understand that it was. I still don't know how I feel about this, but at least initially I understood that I was hurting my mom every day when I left the church, and there was nothing I could do about it, because it's not as if I just choose to have faith. I lost it, and there's a reason why it's called lost. It's because it's really difficult to get back. It's not something that I just decided to leave behind. It was something that was incapable of me grasping. And I hate that. I hate so much that I'm put in this position where I'm taking every value that I was taught when I was young, every value that I was taught by them, and it's being twisted around and looked at as if it's some monstrosity. And I had some friends leave the church when I was growing up, and my dad said, oh, they thought too hard about the church. And I just thought, that's crazy. What? They thought too hard about it? And they came to a conclusion that it really bothered me, but I decided to leave it alone. But anyways, I'm now at BYU looking for a social group, and we joined this, and I discover Jared's group, and it was a godsend for me. It was great. It was everything I needed. I just needed some friends that I could talk to, and it was phenomenal. And I realized while I was there that there were a lot of things that people need guidance in, and I didn't feel like I was the one to give it. I didn't even know what I thought about a lot of things, but it really struck me that the first thing that happened when I said, hey, I don't know if I believe in this moral system, this religious institution anymore, that it was an active LDS friend at the time who told me, hey, do you want to smoke some weed? To me, that frightened me so much, because it felt as though if people, including me, leaving a religious institution that's very high demand as it is, and one that is a moral arbiter, people leave and they lose their moral compass and they have to rebuild it for themselves. And that's a dangerous place to be in for a lot of people. I'm trying to think of anything else that I really feel is important to cover. Really, it comes down to the values that my parents told me were important, which are supporting the people in need. And in this journey, I've met so many more people than I even ever thought could be in need. And I've made friends that I would never have made as a member of the church. And that's not to say that the church is evil. I don't believe that it is. I just don't think that they actively do good. And I don't think that they were honest with me and many people. I remember being in high school, that experience that I was talking about a little bit ago. And in that experience, I had some friends approach me and tell me, hey, in South Park, they have Joseph Smith, and he translates the golden plates using a seer stone, a rock, and a hat. And I said, that's ridiculous. Like, you should talk to the people that actually know. Like, number one, I've been taught, and this is my religion, I've been taught about the way that the church, the way that Joseph Smith translated the golden plates. And he used the Urim and Thummim, he used Revelation, and like that was it. There was no rock in a hat. I would know that. They would mention that. That's the rock in the hat is just as strange as translating gold plates using a breastplate with 2 rocks. There's no reason that they would ever try to keep that from anybody. There's no reason it wouldn't come up. Not even if they were trying to necessarily keep it from someone, but there's no reason that they wouldn't talk about it if that were the case. And my friend said, yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And he trusted me. And then as I looked through church history in that night, I remember feeling so deceived because I felt that I had unwittingly lied. I'd unwittingly defended something that was not true. And I felt used. I didn't know what to do about it, and I just kind of left it alone right there. But since then, I've never wanted to defend something as without feeling that I really have done my due diligence on it since. And with this, I really do feel like I want to defend the BYU Survival Guide because I've met so many people who've been affected by losing their faith at BYU.
So talk about how did you experience BYU once everything came crashing down? What was that like for you?
Well, first, I tried to move away. I tried to run away. I tried my very best to move to North Carolina because it was as close as you can get to somewhat California weather, as well as being away from California and having weather patterns.
As a student?
Yeah, I tried to I thought, you know what? I'm going to quit BYU. Can't handle this. I had a friend who was on a mission. I messaged him and said, hey, I'm going through a faith transition. And I asked him if he wanted to know everything that I knew. And he said, yes, because I'm going through suicidal thoughts right now and I really need help. And so I explained everything to him, and he said, this is exactly what I've been struggling with, and I'm going to come home. And I said, okay, I'll help you get there, because I knew what it was like, and I knew what it was like to come home early too. And that's another big thing that I kind of forgot to mention was when I came home early, people judged me really hard within the ward. And because I didn't talk about why I came home, I felt embarrassed. I was really nervous that my parents would be mad as I got home. And when I expressed that to them, they laughed and said, why would you even think that? And I was like, oh yeah, like that is a really dumb thought to have. But it was ingrained in me that it's like a mark of honor. And if you don't finish, there are reasons. And I was really worried that my parents would be upset. I'm really glad that they weren't, and they're really good people for not being upset. But when it really opened my eyes as a believing member of the church to what it feels like to be the other. And I remember thinking like, wow, this is exactly how all of my friends growing up felt, like who didn't go to church as often as they like should have. That's what they were feeling this whole time. So much judgment and so much hate. No wonder they didn't go. I was really insecure about it. I didn't know how to address it. And it really opened my eyes to just what it feels like to be the outsider for once. I had been bullied in high school and junior high and stuff like that, but I had never really felt like an outsider within what felt like my home. And so being at BYU, I just thought, this is it all over again. I can't handle this. I messaged this friend and said, hey, this friend that was on his mission and came home, said, hey, let's move in together. And he said, yeah, absolutely. Let's move to somewhere with weather patterns. And that was our compromise, North Carolina. And I drove out there. I picked him up on the way. It didn't work out. I dropped him off and drove back to Provo. Because I just kind of meandered around the states for a while because I didn't know where I wanted to end up. And then I ended up back in Provo thinking, how did I end up here? And I tried to register at Salt Lake Community College. And when that happened, they lost my social security number and swapped it with other people's. And I thought, this isn't an institution that I really want to have my future rest on. And as I was going to register for Salt Lake Community College, thinking I had no other choice, the URL auto-filled and filled in with BYU's registration page. And I found out that all I needed to do to maintain being a student was I just needed an ecclesiastical endorsement. So I thought, okay, like I can do that, maybe. So I went to my bishop at the time because I was living in off-campus housing at BYU because I hadn't sold my contract still. I was still living at BYU that whole time and paying rent. So I went back and talked to the bishop, and I told myself I wasn't going to lie. And so I went in there and said, hey, here's the deal. I don't believe a lot of this, but I'm not necessarily ready for the conversation to be over. So if you want to convince me of your side, I'm open in all ears. And I still am for anyone who's like watching, but I'm still willing to have that conversation, but it's going to have to be convincing. Like that's part of the thing that I really am I'm a big proponent of convincing arguments. And right now I feel like it's convincing not to be a member of the church. But I told my bishop that, and he said, okay, I'll have to pray about it. And then an hour later, I got a message from him saying, you're in, you can go about as you please, register and whatnot. And I said, okay. And so I registered. And so during that semester, I was very open about my disbelief. And it was a really interesting experience because even though it was a game changer because I felt like I could be open about who I was with less consequence than before. I still had to be careful of the honor code because the honor code will still crack down on that. But as far as religious enforcement, that was something that I felt like I had been liberated from. And so I talked to my religion professors outside of class for hours and about my issues, and they I really want to put this on the table that religion professors, as an ex-Mormon BYU student, or even just a non-Orthodox BYU student who still believes in some things but not all things, religion classes can be hard. But please don't place that blame on your religion professor, because he expressed to me how even though he really wants to teach factual things in the classroom, and I'm sure he does, and he did, his main priority is not education, it's spiritual upliftment. It's to be spiritually uplifting. And so he told me that his job is more dependent upon him being spiritually uplifting than being educationally proficient. And so with that said, just don't put too much blame on the professors. I more blame a poor institutional position that they've been put in. I think that there's a lot of good that's happening at BYU, but this is just one of the things that I feel like is a failure within the classroom. I think that BYU has a lot of really good things to offer, and I had a wonderful experience while I was there. I've now transferred to University of Utah, and the experience is very different, equally good, just very different. And there are things that I really miss about BYU at University of Utah, and there are things that are new at University of Utah that I really wish had been at BYU and still wish would be at BYU. A lot of it I just recently entered this week, and the first thing that they do is have you take a course that's mandatory on sexual harassment and sexual safety and appropriate use of and safe use of alcohol on campus in your personal life. And I think regardless of, even if you don't think you'll ever participate in those activities, I think it's really important to understand safety within those contexts, because friends do it, you may do it, you never know. And those are things that I wish had been and will I wish that they would be instigated at BYU as safety precautions for people who choose to participate in those activities.
Yeah, like consent, responsible drinking.
Yeah, and that's part of what we have on the BYU Survival Guide. And I'm just a kid. I feel like just a kid. I don't feel like I have too much knowledge to really give on the survival guide, and there's a collection of authors. But really, it's just I'm taking what I learn and adding it as we go. And so if there's any critiques or things that are inaccurate, please let me know, let us know, and we would be happy to correct them and fix them.
Okay, so you did spend some time getting to know other non-believing or unorthodox students at BYU, being in kind of these groups that exist.
Yeah, I kind of made it my purpose to, after a while, once I joined Jared's group, and once I joined that group, we found out about another group, and then other groups emerged, and I started realizing that there were a lot of groups, and I tried to make it my purpose to just get my hand in all these different pots, because I want to connect them all, because so many of them feel alone. And it's just such an unfortunate position to be in, to feel so isolated, because it leads to so much thoughts of self-doubt, depression, and anxiety that like permeate this social atmosphere. And I know for me, it really turned my life around as far as feeling confident and being active in different activities again. And now I try to make it part of my life's purpose is just to unite people. And Jared talked a little bit in his segment about breaking down the divide of us and them. And that's something I really, really get behind. I hate the idea, even in this case of the BYU Survival Guide, I don't want this to come off as here you're a believing student and here we're non-believing students. This isn't about that. This is about people being able to socialize within groups that they share values with. And so even if you're a believing Mormon who just maybe doesn't believe in certain aspects of the church as it is institutionally at BYU, that is still a rough space to be at, especially if you don't have anybody who can support you in that. You can very well believe in every aspect of the church but the word of wisdom and think, that doesn't make sense. Or the church's treatment of those in the LGBT community, that doesn't make sense. And it makes it really hard for individuals to find social support. And the church understands how important social support is. One of the things as a missionary that you're taught to do is first get them baptized, second, get them a calling. And getting them a calling is important, and entrenching them within a social community. And I think that's good. I think it's good to have community. I'm not trying to deny what the church has done in that instance as a good thing. I think that in some cases it can be viewed as problematic, but I think that in most cases, when people are provided a community, they're more effective and more healthy at being productive human beings and successful human beings.
Yeah. Well, kudos to you for being willing to be a part of that solution.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know it's meant a lot to a lot of people. And go Utes. One of my daughters just started at the U this fall, so
yeah.
So now we've done the Cougar thing, we've done the Aggie thing, and now we're doing the Ute thing. So
congratulations.
Hope you have a great time with the U.
It's a great time.
Before we go to our fourth part of this series where we actually talk about the survival guide, is there anything you want to end with?
I can't think of anything. I'm sure I'll just add it into that segment. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Andrew Jacobs, for being willing to come on Mormon Stories and share your story. And thanks to all you listeners who have been with us now for these three wonderful stories of courageous, thoughtful, sensitive, passionate BYU students, former BYU students now, who are all scared to come out as unorthodox or non-believers while students, but since graduating have been willing to come out and talk to us about the support groups, the communities within BYU for non-believers or unorthodox believers, and it's important stuff. So to conclude this series, what we're going to do is we're going to end this episode, and then come back and bring all 4 back. And we're going to talk about the BYU Survival Guide. The BYU Survival Guide is really important. You can find it at byusurvivalguide.com. And it's a wonderful resource for current and future BYU students on how to navigate BYU as an ex-post-Northern Mormon-Never Mormon. And we're excited to talk about it. So thanks, everyone. You guys take care, and we'll see you immediately next on Mormon Stories for our final episode on this issue. Take care, everybody. See you soon.